Hi everyone, and welcome to my updated Mercenary Grenadier guide. This is the first build I have played in Path of Exile 2. You might have seen my previous videos on this, and I have recently gone back to update my guide and the build a little bit, and it has become much better than before. So I want to show you what has changed in case you have seen the previous videos already. I also updated a planner that you'll find linked in the description. It has served me pretty well. I blasted this build for like 150 hours or something like that. I did all the content with this, pretty much all the bosses in the game as well, including the endgame stuff. I've been blasting like tier 16, tier 17, even tier 18 maps. So this goes all the way. It's not like the craziest, fastest build out there, but also keep in mind I'm playing this on SSF. So I have much less power to make my character basically, and much fewer uniques. And even there it worked really well. So this kind of just gets started easily and goes all the way to the late game. I also made the setup fairly tanky so that you can survive those high tier maps relatively easily. And it's also thanks to some of the new updates I have put into the planner. So I want to show you what it's all about. Let's get into it. First things first, I want to mention that this build can be played with both Witch Hunter or the Gemini Legionnaire, or potentially even other Ascendancies. So there's nothing in this Ascendancy that is like really build specific or something like that. So technically you can play something very similar on other Ascendancies if you want to. There are obviously some perks that I lean into here with the setup, playing as a Legionnaire. And if you have seen the previous setup, it has changed a little bit. So in the past I was running this double support gem setup here, which I found to be not really all too relevant in the late game, because there are actually a lot of good support gems to choose from for the various abilities that we are using. And in that case, we were actually able to redistribute those points here. So some of the big things that we get from our Ascendancy are the doubled bonuses from our main stats. In particular, strength giving us a lot of life, and also int giving us a lot of mana, which is really useful to sustain the high mana cost of the grenades. You can do this in other ways, but it just helps with the setup and to get it rolling. We also have this here that allows us to more easily introduce other skills from other skill families basically into the setup. For example, I have a flammability curse now that I didn't have before, which actually has a pretty high int requirement and these kind of things. So this actually helps with that. And here we have a lot of elemental damage reduction. If you have the +3 skill slots and then you have like the jeweler orbs to get more supports, you can socket a lot of supports in here. So I actually managed to end up at 87% fire res, effectively halving the damage that I take from fire attacks. And I found this unique here at some point, the Cloak of Flame. A lot of people ask me about it, why am I using this? And the reason for that is this 40% physical damage taken as fire. With this high amount of fire resistance, I can effectively completely ignore half or almost half of the physical damage I take, giving me a lot of damage reduction, especially against big one-shot attacks from bosses, but also in general, it just like reduces the incoming damage a lot. Previously, I was focusing a lot more on armor, trying to survive, and it has not really turned out to be that efficient at building the defenses, and instead I actually removed all armor from this build and we went with the Cloak of Flame. It has been superb for survivability. This actually allows us to introduce a little bit of evasion as well. I'm not really leaning into evasion a lot, but if you have some, you can get some evasion bases here, not really too much, but you can get to something like 20-30% evasion, maybe a bit more even, relatively easily. And this just overall reduces the incoming damage. And together with the Cloak of Flame and these high elemental resistances, you have good damage reduction against physical and most of the elements, especially fire. So the only thing that's left is building a bunch of chaos res. So if you kept that out at 75, you're usually fine. So we can do this, for example, with amethyst rings and like a few rolls on some of the gear. And there you go, we have protection against everything. And it feels pretty good despite being a life-based build, not an ES build. And let's talk about our main skills a little bit. So we have Explosive Grenade and Gas Grenade. The most of the damage comes from the Gas Grenade in this build. This does a lot of explosion damage. The way this works is that you shoot a Gas Grenade, then it pops and there's like this cloud, and then you can ignite that cloud, and that is what does the real burst here. There is also the Explosive Grenade that is kind of supplementary. So we do damage with both, but most is the Gas Grenade. And we use the Explosive Grenade to pop the Gas Grenade. So a lot of people ask me, why not Explosive Shot? Why not using the Radiant Grief helmet? There's a unique helmet that allows you to like ignite everything around you permanently, which allows you to use those gas grenades much more easily. You can do that, but I think it might fall off a little bit at some point. But in the earlier game, maybe it's really good. I actually have not found Radiant Grief, so I have not been able to try it on SSF. But that is also a combo you can go for. The thing is that if you combine explosive grenade and gas grenade and kind of shoot them back and forth all the time, you actually don't have too much issues with the cooldowns as well. They have cooldowns, and if you just attack too fast with the same grenade over and over, you'll just run out of grenades, and you have to actually heavily invest into cooldown recovery, which I'm not really doing that much. So this is another perk of having two different skills here. So effectively, for most combat situations, clearing maps, I just shoot explosive and follow up with a gas, and then they pop at almost the same time with the way that I have to set up. The gas grenade pops slightly before the explosive grenade explodes, which means you have the clouds and they get immediately ignited, and then you get the big pops all at once together. Now there are a few more active skills here. You see there's actually a lot of them, and you don't have to be that intimidated by them. You can leave out some of them even completely, and most of them use very situationally. So the main combo is explosive plus gas, and then go back and forth. We also have the oil grenade. I use this frequently, for example, on rare leads or on the bosses. So you just pop this like once every 6 seconds or 8 seconds or something like that. It slows enemies and applies fire exposure. You can also ignite the ground effect that it creates, and then you can just shoot the gas grenades a bunch in a row basically to do a bit of a burst, for example, on bosses. So this just helps out with the tougher targets. We have the flash grenade. I use this quite rarely. This is mostly to make stuff a bit safer. For example, in a breach, in a ritual, you can just pop them here and there. So this helps to survive in those, like, very intense, tight spaces. We have the classic grenade, kind of for the same purpose, because I have this link to bludgeon to knock enemies back. Again, this mostly helps out in rituals, for example, where you can get ganged on quite easily. And then we have flammability. So previously I had a low level enfeeble here to try to survive bosses a little bit more, but since the setup has just become very tanky by default, I dropped that, and now we have flammability. So this is a lot of fire resistance reduction for the enemy, and this allows us to just deal a lot more damage, especially against tough rares. Sometimes there's resistant rares or the bosses as well. So I pop this mostly on the bosses and don't really press this button otherwise. I have a leap slam here, pretty optional, but sometimes you might want to get over like a ledge or something. I just have this on my weapon swap here with a mace, for example. Here's a flame wall. So this is also something I use relatively rarely, sometimes on the bosses, but also not really required. It just gives you a bit of extra fire damage when you shoot through the flame wall. So you just pop this down on the boss, and you do oil, you do a flame wall, and then you shoot your grenades, and you do a bit of extra damage. But it's not really that crazy. You can also just completely leave this out. And then we have one aura here. This is attrition. Attrition is really useful to just cut short some of the longer boss fights. We do a lot of extra damage over time. And I have here clarity, vitality, and precision. So we don't get a bit of use of our spirit here. You can also leave out some of these supports and maybe throw out the leap slam or throw out the flame wall and then put like another 30 spirit effect here, something like Wind Dancer perhaps, or maybe something else that you might want to go for. So there's a bit of freedom here. Also, like some of those active skills, we don't really care too much, like the cluster grenades, for example. So there is definitely a bit of room here. And then if you have leftover skill slots, in this case, because you get +3 from integrated efficiency on the Ascendancy, you just fill it up with random stuff, mostly red gems, because you want to build the extra fire resistance you get from thaumaturgical infusion. So you just put like any kind of random skills. You don't have to put them on the bar. You just have them in your skill inventory, and then you can have even more resistances. Our main damage links are on the gas grenade. So for example, here's Immolate for 30%, Scatter Shot for 2 more grenades, Elemental Focus, Fire Infusion, Primal Armament. We do a lot of fire damage. In fact, gas grenades converts 100% of physical to fire. Explosive grenades converts 80%. So in general, we go for a lot of, for example, the flammability, the fire resistance reduction, and fire damage. And now explosive grenades has a few other utility and damage choices. Here's Martial Tempo, for example, to make it faster. I also put mobility here, which kind of feels good. It's not a damage gem, but especially while mapping, you shoot this very often, and then you have just more speed going through the map. So it feels kind of nice, but you can replace this if you want, or if you don't have 6 links, you want to first 6-link your gas grenade and then 6-link the explosive grenade. And you can also leave out, something like execute or mobility here. It's not really too crazy. Inspiration, I was actually not even running this at the end because I just had enough mana, so I just put something else there. And we have fast forward. This is a relatively important one here on the explosive grenade. This makes it so that it actually has a much shorter delay, and we don't actually have to pick up any skill effect duration reduction or something like that on the tree, besides like one cluster that we have for the grenades down here. This gives them a shorter fuse. So like this, we have a perfect combo with the gas grenade and the explosive grenade popping at pretty much the same time. Our oil grenade here has Strip Away, Despoiler, Encumbrance, and Maim, so it's mostly a slow and exposure tool. Then we have Flash, so we have Overpower, Ruthless, Heft, Brutality, so this is like full physical damage and stuns. We have Cluster with the knockback, and a bit more AoE, payload, ingenuity. You can also put this on another grenade if you want. This is not really something that is that required. But as I mentioned, sometimes in like rituals I use cluster, so it's nice to have it back earlier. You have clarity, vitality, precision, and then flammability, heightened curse, arcane surge, and persistence. So it lasts longer, it casts faster. Just kind of nice to make it more smooth. And here's a flame ball with expanse. It gives it a cooldown, but makes it larger. Then we have fire mastery for a +1 level, which makes the added fire damage when you shoot through the flame ball a bit stronger. And lastly, spell cascade. So we just have more flame balls going around, so there's more options to reposition and shoot through the flame wall. As for our gear, it looks like this. So you want an expert bombard crossbow. This is the best base for this build, which has a +1 grenade, and like this. And the skill tree, there's like this note here somewhere where you get +1 projectile as well. You always get at least 3 projectiles and even 5 with a scatter shot on a gas grenade. So you have a lot of extra damage like this, and you really want to have this base. There are other crossbows that have similar damage, but not this +1 grenade. So you just have to see this as like almost another damage multiplier in some cases, which is really useful. And you focus on high physical damage because we convert that physical to fire, and we want to try to get as much of that fire damage. If you have like a nice flat fire damage roll, that's also fine. Or just like if you can't really get a really good physical crossbow, then it's fine to, at least for a while, go with any kind of combination of high elemental damage. But realistically, you want to get as much fire damage as possible to benefit from all those fire synergies. Attack speed is kind of nice because these grenade attacks are generally pretty slow, and you also want to stack a bunch of stats on your gear. So you want to have resistances and especially strength on your gear. So for example, I put strength on the crossbow. You can have some strength on the ring, maybe on the belt. So you try to like fill that up a little bit because strength is doubled on this build thanks to the Ascendancy. Double the bonus, so each strength is 4 life. And this means that I was running around with like 370 life or something. I get like almost 1500 life just for my strength. So that's a really good way of scaling up your life. And in the end, I ended up with like almost 4k or something like that. And the rest is resistances, life, a bit of mana, a bit of damage, maybe a bit more attack speed on the gloves, movement speed on the boots. And this is basically how you want to make your setup look like in the end. Personally, for example, I found an ingenuity belt, which is the drop from King in the Mist that gives you a bigger benefit of your rings. So that was something pretty strong as well. You don't really require anything special on the belt, for example. So I was using that just for like more stats for my rings, for example. So you can play around a little bit with some good uniques here. I just put this in the setup now because the Cloak of Flame is really good for the defense, especially paired with this high fire res. And you can even try to get to 90% fire res. For example, if you socket some of the soul cores, or there's also rubies you can put on your skill tree that have maximum fire res. If you look for something like that and you reach 90% fire res, you are so tanky against fire. So this helps you out in many situations. Now for the passive tree, the rest looks like this. So you path down straight from the mercenary area, pretty much pick up the grenade stuff, a bunch of extra damage here for 2-handed weapons. And there's more grenade nodes and these grenade nodes. So this is kind of what you go for straight up from the start. You just path all the way down, pick up the damage and the grenades. And you can also see the progression here when you go step by step. So you can kind of see where you want to put your points in order roughly. So that you know when you start out this build, if you're starting fresh, then you can just follow along. I already mentioned these grenade nodes here, so the +1 projectile, +1 cooldown use, we have shorter fuse, so this makes the build just play a lot more fluid. Extra activation here from repeating explosives. Once you have all these grenade things, you can kind of just blast with grenades non-stop. There's also cooldown reduction here, for example, that helps you to get this whole thing going. If you're starting from level 1, you cannot just spam grenades all the time, so you have to complement this with some crossbow attacks. For example, I was using fragmentation rounds a little bit in Act 1 and Act 2, but eventually I phased out the crossbow shots more and more and just focused entirely on the grenades, and I don't have any crossbow attacks in my setup since basically middle of the acts or something like that. After we're done with this middle part of the tree, we go down to the left. So we have extra armor and evasion, crit damage reduction. We pick up a bunch of attack speed here and here. This just makes the build more fluid. So depending on how it feels for you, you can go for this earlier or later. Then we have more area damage and area effect. In general, we try to scale the AoE size of the grenades a lot because they actually just have way more coverage and can blow out the entire screen in one go, which is really satisfying. So I went for that. We have a bunch of like life regen here and here, which just makes it more fluid and mini mapping. You don't have to press a flask all the time. And then we path all the way over here. We pick up a lot of strength and a bunch of extra life. And then we go for the resistances here. So we get a bunch of all res and maximum res. So there's 3 maximum res for each of the elements. This also helps us to cap out our fire really high. And then eventually a bunch of attacks damage here. We have a bunch of jewels on the way. You can see the stats here. There's lots of useful stats on all 3 jewel types. So you can go for emeralds, you can go for sapphires. So I just put a few examples in here that you can check out if you want. And lastly, we have like these other like area damage and area of effect nodes here that we want to go for, and a bunch of attribute stacking stuff here. So depending on how it goes with your attribute requirements as you progress, you can take this cluster here a little bit earlier or later. I have this relatively late, I think, in the setup. So just take it if you need to. And that also wraps up this updated guide here. There are some more notes here that I want to check out maybe. So for example, I have the Venoms listed here. Mana Regen, Chaos Rest is what you're shooting for. But I actually had neither of those two and I was okay anyway. So, you know, this is how it goes sometimes. Unfortunately, can't change it. Installation, I went with Step Like Mist or Acceleration. This is like attack speed, this is movement speed and Mana Regen. So kind of nice to have. Also for the attributes you're looking for, I mentioned Strength. So you just try to get the minimum requirements for Dex and Int for whatever you need on your gear. This is, for example, 116 for your Expert Bombard Crossbow. This should be the highest that you might want to use. But if not, for example, if you have like very high evasion bases or so, then maybe go for a bit of extra Dex and then go all in on Strength. Also, last thing, I should mention that there is a bug with the Gemling Legionnaire, which is that your FPS can start heavily lagging. This is due to the Ascendancy. I'm not sure exactly what is going on. I think it has to do with this resistance node here, where if you just stack a lot of different support gems, and I had a problem for like a full day where I just barely could play the game when I played this Ascendancy. So you might want to try to swap out, especially like some random supports that you have in like useless skills that you don't actually have on your bar. I mentioned you still want to fill up everything for the extra res here. And if you notice these FPS drops, then you should maybe try to move some stuff around or replace one color with another color or something like that. And this might fix it. At least it did for me. And there seems to be probably some weird calculations going on with this Ascendancy node that is not fixed yet. So keep that in mind. And that's it. So hope you enjoyed this guide here. I wish you good luck with the Grenadier. If you're playing this with Gemling Legionnaire or another Ascendancy, let me know how it goes and what you think about the build. And other than that, I've been working on a hardcore solo self-found Ranger lately. And also an Ice Trunk Chayula Monk that I had a lot of fun with that I already released a video for lately. So you can also go check that out. Hope you like this. Stay tuned for more PoE content. And I'll see you guys next time.